welcome back to Business Talk with me, Michael Avery, here on Business Tech. We've just pushed past 500,000 views since launching in November. So thanks to you, the viewer, for really tuning in and streaming this fascinating series of conversations that I've been very fortunate to have with some of South Africa's business leaders. My next guest is one of the leading women in tech. She's been in the industry for over 2 decades now. Julie Tregurtha is Regional Vice President Sales for Africa at Opentext Africa. And we're going to be talking about POPIA today. Welcome to Business Talk, Julie.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me here today.
Now, for those viewers who don't know who Opentext is, just give us your elevator pitch. Who are you? What do you do?
Opentext is an information management company, which means essentially, if we have a look at any business today, there is a plethora of information out there and growing exponentially every day. And many organizations have an immense challenge of trying to ingest, store, manage, govern, secure, and access the information. So Opentext is a global leader in assisting companies with software and cloud services to overcome this challenge.
And we know information really is the lifeblood of this new digital economy that we've been thrust into, partly thanks to COVID. It certainly was a big trend prior to COVID, but I think every business, no matter how small or large now, really understands how important data is to their business. And today we're going to be talking about the Protection of Personal Information Act. It's called POPIA for short. And for those who've been living under a rock, POPIA is really the legislative framework for data protection and governance. And it aims to promote the constitutional right to privacy by safeguarding personal information as well. Now, many years in the making, it finally comes into effect on the 1st of July. Another grudge purchase, some might say. What would you say are the compelling reasons to comply?
I think businesses need to reframe their view towards POPIA compliance. The enactment of the legislation provides an ideal opportunity to get their information governance house in order and to get a solid grip on the myriads of types of personal information residing with their organization and how it's being used through its life cycle. There are many benefits to be derived from complying with the conditions of POPIA, with a major one being gains in the trust of customers. Knowing that your personal information is being collected, processed, stored, and disposed according to the stipulations of the law goes a long way to cementing a customer's trust. And another benefit is that you will also have more insight into what is going on in your business. And you can see significant improvements in efficiency of business processes because of better information flow and management. So my perspective, compliance to POPIA is not just about ticking a box. It's about instilling and adopting the right attitude towards information in your business, as information is the lifeblood of most businesses.
What I'm hearing you say is compliance with the big C gives you a competitive advantage with the big C.
So I think the maturity around information governance compliance towards POPIA today differs from organization to organization and from industry to industry. We see some businesses that are very advanced. They've embraced the principles of privacy management. They've done all the groundwork and they've woven it into their organizational fabric already. And perhaps we see some companies fall into this bracket being ones that are in highly regulated industries, such as financial services or healthcare, or organizations that are quite consumer focused and therefore have had, consumer information, public personal information being stored in there and relevant to their business for some time. On the flip side, we also see many organizations that have ignored it to a large degree. I think hoping that this problem will go away and the legislation will never actually make its way into reality. Or perhaps not ignored it entirely, but maybe just pushed it to the back of their minds and focused on other higher priority things, such as surviving in this buckling economy. But I think also the other space is, if you look at the large tier organizations, perhaps, more sophisticated organizational structures, they may have functions such as, proper internal IT departments and a CIO, or a governance, risk and compliance function or officer inside the business. And then it's a little easier to embrace those functions to assist in putting POPIA compliance in place. And if you don't have these well-established functions, then sometimes businesses don't really know where to start.
Yeah, rather safe and compliant than sorry, they do say, as we have also heard of jail sentences, multi-million rand fines for non-compliance in other jurisdictions with similar legislation. Now, POPIA will no doubt impact and transform the way that business is conducted in the country, and some would say it's just another one of those accelerators or pushes for companies to accelerate their digital transformation efforts. And it's a trend that we've certainly seen explode as a result of the events of the last 12 months. Do you believe that will have a profound impact on how companies start addressing information governance and management, as well as cybersecurity, even for those who pushed it to the one side?
Absolutely, yes. The bottom line is that corporates have to take it seriously. And compliance is not optional. I think, as you've said, Michael, it's not just about the possible penalties or fines or possible even jail sentence at the worst case. It's also the reputational damage that non-compliance could result in. And we've seen examples of this in Europe with the GDPR, regulations, and companies being highly publicized where they have been found to be lacking in their compliance. So I think, as is the case with COVID, POPIA is also another accelerator of digital transformation in an organization. And, linked to digital transformation is a philosophy of how you manage and treat information. I mean, behind it, any digital transformation effort is obviously a significant amount of information, and information has a key part to play. And businesses have to acknowledge that they're working with personal information and lots of it. And as we said already, information is at the heart of any business, from the smallest undertakings to the largest corporations on the planet. And I think greater cognizance around information is imperative. You mentioned cybersecurity. I think we know that in the information security space, we talk about bad actors. And we're reading a lot about how there is an increase in the activities from these adversaries whose sole purpose is to attack information technology systems. So cybersecurity has never been more important.
It's an interesting point you make that, because we talk about information, technology, digital transformation. It sounds like it's a purely technology-driven issue, and Opentext is a technology company. But behind this is people at the end of the day. And I just wanted to get your sense on how you see this playing out, this tension between the technology and the people on the one hand, because obviously technology is one of the key enablers to ensure POPIA compliance. Will we see greater use of technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, or deployments in the cloud? Or is it about getting the people right first? How do you see that playing out?
Michael, you've emphasized a really important point, and I think some companies do get this wrong. POPIA is not about technology. It's about people, processes, and technology in that order. And one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make is that they try and make it an IT-owned problem. They give this burden to the CIO, and it's not going to, ever be solved if that is the approach. It's a collective responsibility. It needs to be owned by everyone in an organization, and it needs to become an ethos. If you think about where personal information exists and is used across the business, it can be from the marketing department, the HR department who's got personal information about the employees and contractors, to customers in sales, or even in the finance department dealing with suppliers. So it is actually something that touches every part of the organization, needs to be woven into the organization's DNA, as I said, from an ethos and a recognition perspective. And I think it needs to be owned as a CEO's agenda item. But yes, going back, technology is a major enabler and certainly has a big role to play in assisting compliance efforts and boosting compliance efforts. And I mean, there's a lot being said and written, and just more and more we're seeing machine learning and artificial intelligence being leveraged in organizations to help automate a lot of processes, and to take care of a lot of mundane, things that like verifications and, enforcement of certain business rules within an organization. But they can only really bear fruit if they're incorporated into the people and the process environment.
Absolutely. And why you say it has to be driven by the C-suite and by the CEO, because ultimately the CEO sets the cultural tone inside an organization, and it does boil down to every single individual understanding that governance and information governance is woven into the culture of the business. Now, POPIA places the obligation to protect data squarely on the shoulders of the business. How has this impacted compliance frameworks to prevent things like data breaches and to reduce vulnerability?
And I think we touched on this just earlier, the risk around cybersecurity. So although you would be looking to, your information governance and compliance and management disciplines to address POPIA, you're going to actually also need to look at it for other purposes like the data breach and the vulnerabilities. We talked about the cyber attacks being on the increase. I mean, to provide a fact, we've seen that, from in 2020 over 2019, we saw an increase by 22% in the number of cyber attacks and breaches that took place globally. So, this is a really real and increasing threat.
How much of that, just to interrupt you, is because we're now working at home and opening up our systems to new threats and new bad actors outside of that safe environment of the office?
And I think that is a massive, reason that we've seen such an increase, because there's been opportunism off the back of the fact that people are no longer working within the firewall of the organization on a corporate network within a domain of an office environment. And people are now taking data that is related to customer, related to company, but into not only their own homes and running off their own devices, but also into coffee shops, or other public places where they maybe have to go and work at times. Load shedding prevents them from working at home, so then I have to go and find some other place. So I think it's really important to have the technology in place to minimize these breaches and reduce these vulnerabilities. And there are proactive technologies that you can get to try and prevent breach. The opportunity to detect, let's say, a hacker in your network, because normally they say, someone breaching your network can lurk around for up to a month before they'll actually hit. You need to have software that can sniff out where this breach, could come from, and if there is a risk. And then obviously the post or reactive technologies, once the actual breach does happen, then going and actually finding where it took place, where the breach happened, from which device or which employee or person, or, how it actually came about. So I think, breach detection, pattern identification, prevention have all become a crucial element of an organization's compliance framework. And yes, we've just said, with working remotely, this new way of work that we talk about, organizations actually have to be a lot more vigilant when it comes to safeguarding all types of information.
Now, one thing that I was quite surprised by when doing a bit of research for this interview was the fact that POPIA stretches all the way into supply chains. And we know supply chains were deeply impacted by COVID, but supply chains are also impacted by the conditions of POPIA. How has POPIA impacted the effort to ensure compliance of your supply chains to reduce the risk of breach or even potential litigation?
So we at Opentext help companies to digitize and automate their supply chains. We run a massive trading grid globally where we connect and facilitate the flow of information between trading partners. And we've got thousands of trading partners across the world on our network. And a key issue is that many cybersecurity intrusions come from vulnerabilities with third-party suppliers. Often you're handing over information to a third-party operator who has to perform some sort of data processing on your data. And when you're talking about the supplier community, they are third-party to your business. They are external to your business. And POPIA is about ensuring that all responsible parties are compliant in how they're dealing with information. So ensuring this compliance within the supply chain is as important as looking at it from within your own organization. We know penalties can be substantial with any claims, even from data subjects themselves. So it's critical to focus on implementing appropriate technological and organizational measures to not only protect this personal data, as I said, from my own organization's perspective, but ensuring that anyone handling or accessing data outside your business, including your suppliers, also is responsible with it.
Wow, it's a pretty big ask. I think through the last 20 minutes that we've been talking, it's really dawned on me just how big and complex this area is, internally, externally, in remote locations. To give viewers just a bit of advice and practical tips and advice in terms of corporate policy changes or how they should go about thinking about their data protection or disposition activities, what would you like to leave them with?
Well, I think, you get those organizations that have the luxury of appointing a big management consulting firm to come and do a gap analysis and an assessment and then, make recommendations around POPIA compliance from start to end. But I think there's a lot of organizations that don't have that opportunity. So the first step, in my opinion, as said already, if not already done, is for the CEO to appoint an individual or a team to oversee POPIA compliance, and to remember it's a collective effort and not an IT problem. And then organizations need to look at how they're managing information in relation to the conditions that are set out by POPIA. And there are various sophisticated technologies, even technologies to start by just doing discovery to understand where the information is. What's the usage of information? How many duplicate copies you've got across everyone's devices and servers and inside the office boundaries and outside. So there's, discovery, there's the information governance, there's the privacy management, the data protection, the security, to name a few. And like we've said, technology is not the silver bullet, but it certainly plays a crucial role in ensuring the compliance. I think there's two areas that organizations need to pay immediate attention to. The first one is risk remediation in unstructured data environments. So as an initial step, companies need to look at the unstructured information in their business. We know that only 20% of data in a business is typically sitting in some sort of a database or spreadsheets or some application system, but up to 80% can be sitting outside of that in some unstructured formats. It could be email, it could be physical documents, it can be employee files or contracts. So there's all this, this different type of data that sits around the organization. So understanding where it resides and the risk it poses or the sensitivity related to that data is a really, important place to start. And then obviously remediating that risk, moving data to secure and compliant data repositories, and then preparing for the effort that's going to go into identifying, classifying the personal data. So, there's a lot of automation of this that can be done, and obviously technology can be used to assist in that process. But I think this discovery, classification, and retention is a key part. And then the second part, which I think deserves attention, is what we talked about as DSAR, which is the Data Subject Access Request. And what that means is that I could be a data subject. I am a person whose personal information is stored by many companies. And at any stage that I feel I want to, I may ask the company to have access to my personal information, or I could ask a company to delete it or to correct it. And this can present a huge challenge for so many businesses because they actually really don't even know where to go and find it. It can take huge amounts of time. It can be a huge operational burden. Often many manual processes just to try and actually address these types of requests. So being able to respond to such data subject requests, as we said, goes back to instilling confidence and trust in the individuals who need to know that their privacy rights are being considered and that their personal data is being responsibly managed.
And trust is so key. I often chat to Jeremy Sampson of Brand Finance Africa on my radio show about building trust as companies, as brands, and how important that is in today's environment where we have so much more attention on things like data privacy. And there's Netflix documentaries about them. We all know the Cambridge Analytica stories. I think the consumers are just much more sensitive towards how their personal data is stored. And also to view this as not just a compliance issue, but strategic, competitive advantage issue. Understanding your data and perhaps how you could leverage that to add more value to the top and the bottom line. Julie, the bottom line for viewers, if they want to get hold of you, how can they?
Michael, I'm on LinkedIn under Julie Tregurtha, so people may find me there. Otherwise, my email address is jtregurtha, my initial and surname, at opentext.com, and I would welcome anyone reaching out to me.
Jules, otherwise known as Jules Tregurtha, Regional Vice President for Sales for Africa at Opentext Africa, talking about POPIA and the need to rather be safe and compliant than sorry as we await for it to become effective on the 1st of July. You've been watching this episode of Business Talk on Business Tech with me, Michael Avery.